Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
So thank you all for joining us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. And we have a dilemma, and we need more dilemmas, obviously. And the dilemma is, how do we communicate with the vast majority of the population on this planet? And part of the problem is that this large part of the population of this planet only recognizes what is going on this planet. And how did we get into that dilemma? And so we'd really like to discuss that and figure out how that is happening, because we need to differentiate. We need to be able to communicate, and above all, we need to be able to transmit. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We are entering the intermediate transmission phase. We're going to talk about Y-axis transmission. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is January 21st, 2024. And this is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So thank you all for joining us. So we have a monumental task ahead, because not only do we have to distill the 10 years plus of teaching and put it down into more bite-sized pieces, but we have to go even further than that. So in follow-up to the second decade of the Knowledge Seekers workshops, and with the tremendous work of the Brazilian community, and we are the third in line. So there's a Knowledge Seekers workshops on Thursday, the Brazilian team on Friday, and the North American team on Sunday. And if it wasn't for the foreigners, this meeting would not be as powerful as it is. So I thank you very much, because in North America, you're foreigners, but in your country, we are the foreigners. And so what we're trying to figure out is, how do we communicate? Not only do we have distance problems, we have social problems and language problems. And we also have transmission problems, and we have difficulty understanding the different dimensions. And so we're going to introduce the Y-axis dimension today, because we have a lot of donkey hesitancy. So one of the things that we found with our physicality is that it's a lowest energy state. And in that lowest energy state, it seems to have a very strong energy that causes us the hesitancy to move from this state. So how can this weak energy state have such a strong affinity? And we found that as we walk around, we find that actually rolling is faster than walking. And maybe we can add jumping and flipping And the thing is that we seem to be bound by things, and so we wish to be released. And how does that happen? And so we wish to let me go. Who are we wishing to? So we find that life is hard until you get up on the horse, and then things move a little bit faster. So getting up is the topic for today. And we're trying to follow up on the books of Marantaba Kolikesh, the book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And the thing is, there's a universal order of creation and there's a universal order of matter. And the questions always become, which dimension are we talking about? And so we know that there must be at least 2 dimensions because there's book number 2, and that talks about the structure of light. And actually, if the structure of light is between two dimensions, then which dimension is the structure of light? And I'm sorry to be asking all of these questions because we're trying to provide the answers. And then there's book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. And if things weren't confusing enough, how can the origin of the universe precede the creation of matter? Or how can the creation of matter precede the origin of the universe? And is that confusing? So the point of the matter is that we have lots to learn. And so some of us, as I've embarked on this transmutation preparation session, and this week we have completed the first of 6 sessions, which we are going to be carrying on until June of 2024. And it's pretty well self-explanatory. We need to learn how to proceed with transmutation. And so preparation is always done in advance. And as such, we have been trying for 309 weeks also, thanks to the efforts of Rick Crammon and the Universal Council, to bring the one nation, one planet, one race for world peace together. Because anytime you do something, you have to have a purpose. And the purpose of world peace is not just a noble purpose. It is the purpose. And there's a reason for that, because the transmission that we're talking about today, and that happens to be in our environment, but it transcends that environment and involves the entire universe. And so this is the problem that we're having, because as we search for outer space and we try and find that second dimension of the plasma highway, that leads us to that pie in the sky, isn't it? Isn't that little pie in the sky that we want? Well, you know what? We already have this little pie in the sky, and we call that Earth, and it's part of man's universe. And the problem with this concept, of course, is that it's teeny tiny, and there's a vast universe out there. And do you want to go through your life wondering what is going on out there? Or do you actually want to find the answers to that? So in order to find the answers, we not only have to ask the question, we have to ask the right question. Because as we're looking at the plasma highway, we try and figure out how do we get on that highway? Well, you have to know where we are right now. And we are on the transmission highway. And when we say the transmission highway, it's the same highway that I'm communicating with you at this point in time. And it's the way we all communicate on this planet. But there's something that we have to understand about this particular transmission highway, because there has been a school of thought discussing the universal embodiment, where the speed of light is the fastest transmission, and we question if that is true. There's a lot of evidence to suggest otherwise. And the other thing, of course, is the faster you go, the bigger you get. And is that true? And so if you were a good carpenter or a good engineer, you would want to measure that, wouldn't you? But if you're going to measure something that is going faster, then you would have to go faster to keep up with it, to be able to measure it. And so that becomes a challenge in its own. And then once we master that challenge, well, maybe we can discuss the creation of the universe and how the universe is created. So fundamentally, the universe exists from energy. And this is important because energy is always in motion. Because it's in motion, it has a charge. So energy is always positive, but the motion of the energy is either positive or negative. And since it's moving, then it has to go from somewhere to somewhere. So everything is working in combination. Well, how do you work in combination when you're dealing with singularity? And so we look at the universal order of creation of matters, and you see the singularity of the Magritte system, where we have the combination of the matter state, dark matter, and antimatter. And so they come together into one state. And then we find that there are other matters out there. So as things work in combination, then we have to question, how do we work in combination? And so the key to this, of course, is communication. And we see this very much because when we introduce the cups of life, and they say necessity is the mother of invention, these were not the cups of the pandemic, although that was the necessity. They were the cups of life, because that is fundamental to understanding the pandemic. And so we find that this represented an emotional strength as well as a physical strength. And this came from some nebulous point, you see, but in the end, we achieved to make GANS. GANS, which is gas as a nanosolid, solid meaning physical. And so we made GANS as a manifestation of energy fields coming within each cup. And so in the cups of life, we were able to create CO2 GANS and calcium GANS and zinc GANS, copper GANS, water GANS, and amino acid GANS. But these are not the only GANSes. We are dealing with basic knowledge. And as such, when we introduced this series, terminology was very, very important. So to understand the difference between transmission and transition, we had to understand what the x-axis and the y-axis was. So we introduced the x-axis as part of the rotation. That's how we do transmission. But the y-axis introduced polarity. And so once we had the polarity, we had to go through a transition. And so now we're confronting that and looking at the x-axis as part of the transmission dimension. And we're introducing the y-axis as part of the transmission dimension. So in other words, to fulfill the transmission, we needed to have two different dimensions. And this becomes important to understand because when two forces come together, and we've always said this, as they come together, they begin to manifest. And so we can clearly see that there is an x-axis dimension and a y-axis dimension in that manifestation. And when I say that we can clearly see, well, what we can see is that there is a field capture. And the way we understand it, and I'm not talking about the knowledge seekers who've been with us for years, but for the knowledge seekers that have no idea what we're talking about and depend on us to explain it to them. And so this may help. We understand the x-axis transmission is parallel to the ground. So the y-axis transmission is actually perpendicular to the ground. And so this constitutes the two dimensions. One is the x-axis dimension, and the other is the y-axis dimension. And the question, of course, is what is the difference in position between the one on the left and the one on the right? And so somehow, some way, there has to be a field capture. And we know this is true because when we have x-axis transmission that is perpendicular to the ground, then we can roll along. But you know, there's an anomaly here because it's not rolling along on the x-axis. If we are playing ice hockey, then we are, but we're not rolling, we're sliding. So we see a flat puck slides on a flat ice surface. And the reason we did it because there's less friction on an ice field. And so we created this game, and we can move this puck along the x-axis dimension. And we see that the rotation of the puck is on the x-axis dimension. But if we input a rotation into the perpendicular motion, then the output motion is aligned with the rotation. So we can roll along the x-axis dimension, but the input is perpendicular to this motion. So we have x-axis transmission and we have y-axis rotation. But if we stop the input rotations, so there's no perpendicular input rotation, and we change the y-axis dimension, somehow, some way, the output motion is still aligned with the rotation, but we've created a slope. And based on that slope, we have motion. So we've been able to do this without any input rotation. So we're talking about the y-axis dimension, and this becomes very important in construction. And there are a lot of things that we want to construct. So when we construct a building, and every builder knows that it's very important to have good studs. And so in Canada, 2x4s are the basic dimension. There's also 2x6 and 2x8, but all this includes is the x-axis dimension, which represents width, and the y-axis dimension, which represents height. And this is what we're really concerned about when we're talking about the size, isn't it? And it's ironic that, 2x4 is such an important number. We're in the year 2024, and of course in Canada, that's an important number. That's the number of bottles in a case of beer. So we have these relationships, and we see that the y-axis dimension affects the x-axis transmission. But interestingly enough, the x-axis dimension affects the y-axis transmission. What? Well, yes, because the diameter or the radius and the circumference are affected by pi. And so if you change one, you change the other. So when we had bicycles, there was one version that had a small wheel and a large wheel. And so we find that the circumference of these wheels is based on the diameter. So if we change the diameter of the wheel, we actually change the distance that wheel will travel in one rotation, because the circumference is also bigger. And the one thing that is constant is pi. Pi is 3.14 plus, on and on and on. So we'll just fudge that and just say it's 3.14 so that we can understand the relationship between the x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension. So historically speaking, when we wanted to discuss the distance of the transmission, One of the ways we did that, of course, is to base it on the length of the foot. Well, we had a problem with this because we had to figure out whose foot are we going to measure. Well, we'll just, determine the length of a foot. And how long is a foot? Well, I guess that all depends on who you're talking to. And so we find that not only is the length different from person to person, but the height of the foot is different because the height of the person needs a bigger foot. And so we find that, again, the y-axis dimension affects the x-axis transmission. But then so does the x-axis dimension. It affects the y-axis transmission. So it is possible to have a longer foot with a shorter height, or it is possible to have a longer foot with a higher height. And so in this relationship, we have a problem because we don't really understand how big is large. And so the question then comes is, can you build a home as a good carpenter and base it on length and width? Because as we've just said, the x-axis dimension represents the length of the foot. But the x-axis dimension represents the width of the 2x4. So which is it? Is it the length or is it the width? And who's going through the door? And if you're too big, well, you may have to duck. And we know about this problem because when we do x-axis transmission and we play games, we were kicking soccer balls around, and in order to move them, we kind of bounced them, and we learned how to kick them on the bounce. But sometimes we didn't learn our lessons very well because we got very angry. And so we didn't worry about the x-axis transmission. We put all our energy into the y-axis transmission, and sometimes the ball would rebound and hit us in the head. And boy, that would hurt. And so those were lessons in anger. So we're looking at a balance in the x and the y axis. And so we found that if we can change the curvature in ice hockey, we could deflect the puck into the stands where the fans of man were and not get hit as the puck is going up. But so now we've taken this sliding puck, which was only looking at the x-axis dimension, and we had to introduce a y-axis dimension. And maybe the y-axis dimension was, why would you go to a hockey game and put your life in your hands when you might get hit by a puck that's traveling at 160 kilometers an hour? But that was part of the excitement. And so we have moved along where we were spinning along. And so we find in order to spin along, we have to do this at perpendicular to the ground. And in that perpendicularity, if we spin 360 degrees, then we can take that x-axis and have different perspectives. And we can move along the x-axis dimension. But actually, we had to have a y-axis dimension in order to facilitate this spinning. And so coming to that conclusion, we find that the transmission is dependent on the interaction of these two dimensions. And so the question then becomes is, what is the difference in the position? If we have an x-axis transmission, which is perpendicular to the ground, and we have this y-axis transmission, which facilitates the spinning of 360 degrees. How do we go from the one side to the other side? And so we find that there's something that we have to take into account. And so we finish with the basic transmission to understand that there's a field release. So when we created the cups of light, we had this GANS binding. And with that GANS binding, it was created by our input. But if we create this excessive input rotation, which in fact is an extreme offsetting to our input, we can create a field release. And interestingly enough, this created a plasma stability. And so not only were the sports fans of man, but the fans of man were giving us plasma stability. And this was a wonderful new technology. And so interestingly enough, there's other looming technology on the horizon. But we also had a looming technology in the past, which gave us cloth making. And the cloth making allowed us to weave along the x-axis and the y-axis. And depending on how we transmitted the instructions to the loom, we could determine the size of the cloth. And once we had that cloth, we could clothe man. And of course, man became judged by the cut of the cloth. So if the length and width is not working, then maybe we can look at the length and the height. And in this regard, we create a graph. And so we see that the x-axis dimension is along the bottom of the graph, and the y-axis dimension is along the side of the graph. And still, the y-axis dimension affects the x-axis transmission, but the x-axis dimension affects the y-axis transmission as well. And so by graphing it, we can see a relationship. And the interpretation of that relationship is a reflection of energy and motion, you see, because there's a negative and positive. So which is it? Is the x-axis transmission or the y-axis transmission, which is negative or positive? So we decided that based on the surface to volume ratios, the higher the ratio, the higher the negative charge. And on that basis, the negative gives and the positive takes. And so in that regard, we found that energy can be flowing or it can be binding. And as such, when we look at the stairway to heaven, we found that, musically speaking, the high notes were gravitational, the low notes were magnetical. And there was this in-between zone we called susceptibility. And so that was the result of the graph. But the construct of the graph originated from the x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension. And so the x-axis dimension represented the distance from complex to simple. And the y-axis dimension reflected stable towards unstable. And if we follow the susceptibility stairway to heaven, we found that we could graduate from a very stable and complex construct to a very unstable and simple construct. However, we could also go down the stairway and go from an unstable and simple construct down to a very stable and very complex construct. And so this is very important to understand in terms of transmission, because you see, historically speaking, we have always chosen this energy binding manner, which is self-serving. And in order to do that and be self-serving, we did it at the expense of others. This is an important point, and has always been an important point, because when we look at what we have and we see that the x-axis is a plane, and that plane will rotate, and it'll rotate around a pole, and the y-axis is the polarity. And so you have your two dimensions. And you have your two-way transmission. But because these are two dimensions, we have to understand it's also a two-way street. Because you see there are two directions. But are there only two directions? And then you have two sizes, but are there only two sizes? And you have two variables. But are there only two variables? So in this discussion, we have an x-axis dimension and a y-axis dimension. And those are the only two variables that we have in this discussion on the Earth space embodiment. And so we find that if we were going to measure these dimensions using the foot of man, we find that man's undependable. There are too many variables. So man has chosen Earth space as the common denominator. And this is very good, because there's so many of us, there's over 8 billion of us, and we are all variable. And we have one thing in common, and that is our Earth space. So Earth space is much more dependable. And this is an important thing to understand, because it's all part of this binding energy transmission. So this energy that comes in, and more comes in through absorption, which is facilitated by attraction, and this facilitates gravitational stability. This is the important point. That's part of the Earth space embodiment. But in order to maintain this Earth space embodiment, there has to be an elevating energy transmission out, and more has to go out. We do this by way of emission. It's also a form of repulsion. But either way, it represents a magnetical stability. So these two work together. And so this is the thing to understand about transmission, is that it is a two-way street. And as such, there is a sequencing. So the release of the binding energy precedes the retrieval of the beneficial energy. And the field release of the transmission energy precedes the field capture. So the giving precedes the taking, and the emission precedes the absorption. So therefore, the plasma dominant transmission precedes the physical dominant transmission. And so we have a conflict, because we're trying to figure out which dimension-centric point of view is dominant. So because man is not dependable, very variable, the conclusion is it's not man space-centric. And the conclusion is it's probably Earth space-centric. But when it's regarding the sun space dimension, the conclusion is non-conclusive. So when we're looking at the plasma dimension, and we find we're discussing matter plasma, well, we have a small m matter state, which is physical, and that is gravitational. That's part of the feedback. And then we have a capital M matter-gen state, which is plasmatic. And that state is magnetical. And that is part of the feeding dimension. And so clearly, from man's centric point of view, man is feedback dominant. Well, now we are in the post-November the 11th of 2023, the new era where we have choices. And not just two choices, but more than two choices. We have the capability of referencing the outer space, that transmutation space, and the earth space, which is that bountiful space. And it's manifest in that graceful space of our inner space. And this is how we've been transcending the limitations of nuclear science for 521 knowledge seekers workshops in a row for the past 10 years. This is all part of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. Welcome all the beautiful knowledge seekers. There's a World Peace Treaty. Sign it. How are you going to sign it? You can sign it with a pen, you can sign it with your soul, and you can either do it through the x-axis dimension or the y-axis dimension. But the time has come to shake things up. We have to ask questions because this will help us get to the answers. Where can man be dependable in a two-dimensional universe? And can man find heaven through field transmission of vertical motion with the guidance of forward motion and perpendicular rotation? So this is hopefully helpful in understanding that the dimensional interaction is foundational for transmission. And that transmission is going to be the plasma science, which needs to continue to be delivered daily in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. Thank you for allowing me to present. Hope you enjoyed the trip.
That was a very quick trip through the dimensions. Thank you, Alex. Again, there's so many things to consider. Are you, Mr. Keshe keeps explaining about the dimension of energy, the dimension of physicality. We're familiar with the physicality. We're not familiar with the dimension of energy. This is what we're learning. Is the X and the Y dimensions physicality and energy, or are they both physicality? I'm trying to think about this in a way that I can bring it into my life in a way.
Well, I'm glad you're stumped with that.
Yeah. Doesn't take much, Alex, remember.
No, no, it's almost as if it's mission accomplished. So you've asked the right question, because that becomes fundamental. We are talking about transmission. So is transmission something that is only restricted in the physical plane? So I think we'll all agree that it transcends that physical plane, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So by you bringing up that question, it kind of represents a kind of a success in this presentation, if I may accept that is not the only transmission. That is really the whole goal plan here, is because we have a population on this earth which only recognizes the physical dominant state. And so when we're talking about transmission, we understand we can talk, we can see, we can hear, we can play the radio, we can go on the internet, we can use telephones, we can use iPhones and iPads, and we can even use drums. And, remember, we used to use smoke signals as well. So there's a lot of ways that we can do transmission. But everything that I've just described is physical. So once you understand that those are all under the umbrella of the physical dominant state, then what is not on that list is not part of the plasma state. And this is important for the scientific community to understand that difference. Because there is a difference, you know that is a difference, because love is not on that list. Love is not a physical transmission. The act of sex is a physical transmission, but the art of love is not. So we accept that in a way, but we have difficulty explaining that. Well, it becomes our responsibility now to explain that, because clearly we can see that there's a lot of hurt on this planet. We need to soothe that. We need to relieve that. We need to release that binding energy, and we need to retrieve the energy that is vital. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, let's open it up for others to make comments and ask questions if they'd like to join the discussion. There's probably a lot of places in the universe that need correction or elevation, and I think we're probably learning this in a way to replicate what's being done here through the foundation. I mean, we're still pretty young in the understanding of it all, but we're actually seeing a peace brought to a planet. Would this be something we would probably perhaps do in the future if we heard other civilizations calling for help and arrange for their elevation into the universal community? And this is one of the things Mr. Kesh says he's been doing for quite a long time, and apparently there are many other places that need the same sort of enlightenment or elevation, that are waiting for the change, but they can't bring it within themselves, it seems, because as like with this planet, the soul that created this planet had a wrong streak in it.
See what I like about your question?
No, what?
Well, first of all, what we're trying to do is correct this streak on this planet through a physically dominant manner. And what you suggested is in the universal community that if that's all we know, then let's say we were successful here, and if we were to take that success and replicate it in the universal community, then we know that we could do that physically. But now we have an additional option. Maybe in the universal community, we could do it plasmatically. Since it's a two-way street, if you accept that, then you could easily argue that if we could transmit this beneficence to the universal community in a plasmatic dominant state, then it only stands to reason that we could do the same thing in the earthbound state. Does that make sense to you?
It seems to, yep. I thought you were going to say we needed a bigger hammer or something. This was the solution, but I don't think that's the way you were going.
No, I'm trying to make a glaring difference so that we understand that there's more. And in that regard, we actually need to be more demanding to take more, but not from others, because the others have the same requirement. They need to take more. So if that they becomes you, Mark, and I need more, and I take from you, but you need more. Well, how is that helpful to me? Okay, because you know what? That makes you less helpful.
I only give
So,
you what I don't need.
yeah, but I mean,
That's what I'm giving
oh,
you.
whoa, well, are you that skillful?
Not yet, but we're growing into it.
Ah, well, this is it, you see, because we become so accustomed to stealing energy from others. And if we were all skillful in being able to set up a barrier where we don't leak in energy, then we wouldn't have this problem, would we? But we all do leak in that energy, because when we look at pictures of devastation, we have an emotional reaction, and that is draining. When we engage in a physical activity, there is an energy depletion. When we give time and attention to something, especially on this earthbound plane, we have a depletion. So where does the supplementation come from? And is it enough? And so we look at the main source of the supplementation comes when we sleep. And one of the beautiful ways to sleep is when you're in a peaceful environment. And that peaceful environment includes being at peace with yourself. And how can you be at peace with yourself when you're violating your own soul? So the only way that you can do that is through ignoring your soul. And if you're actually ignoring your soul, one really has to give his head a shake and figure out what exactly he's doing. Because it's not contributing. It's not contributing to them, and it's not contributing to our planet. And since our planet is part of the universal community, then by extension, it's not communicating, um, uh, contributing to them as well.
But I think we're seeing how it's being done. Again, maybe there is an enhanced process going on, or we may have to appear in certain places to bring certain changes in. You know, if there's a planet, you're going to have to go into the physicality dimension to work with them, perhaps. And to bring the change. And again, it's not a day job. I think Mr. Kesh has been here for thousands of years, learning the ways of the man and the customs of the man and all the rest of it. So when this was actually being introduced, it would work. So we may have that same, perhaps, ability.
So there's an interesting characteristic to what you just said. You know, we tend to, work during the day and sleep at night. And so if we were to work in the physicality, it is a day job. And if we were to work in another dimension, then that would be a night job. But there are, people who work 24 hours a day on this planet. And so for them, day is night and night is day. And if there are people who work on this planet, at all hours of the day, then what about the rest of the universe? Because they don't keep track of time the way we do, because our track of time is based on Earth space. So our day and night is based on the rotation of the Earth around its axis and the number of days that it rotates around its axis and completes one rotation around the sun is one Earth year. Well, that's the only relationship that we have at this point in time. Now, what happens if we go to another planet? Where does that calendar go? Where does that time reference and time frame go? And is there going to be a day and a night? Like, let's face it, our day and night is based on the sun, right? It's the sun that, when we look at the sun, then we know there's daytime, and when there's no sun, we know that it's nighttime. This is the basic rule.
For our physicality, but not our soul. I think the soul is working 24 hours a day. This is what we're understanding. I also think we could also spread ourselves. We don't just have to go to one place. We could be in multiple places simultaneously. All depends on how you want to dice it, I suppose. You don't have to just be one entity in one place at one point in time. I think you can, in a way, divide yourself.
So all of us as knowledge seekers get very excited every Thursday because the technology is progressing at such a rapid rate. And fortunately for a lot of us, we've invested a lot of time to try and understand this and comprehend it better and better. And yes, it doesn't answer all our questions, but what we forget is that, when we compare to the types of questions that we have and compare to the type of answers that we have and compare it to people who have no idea about the plasma science, and we find that, wow, we have a lot of answers. So now the question becomes, is how do we convey these answers to these people who haven't had the benefit of the thousands of hours of investment in knowledge seeking? How do we do that? Can we do it faster?
Yeah, he mentioned in this workshop about a way you could touch someone and elevate their physical soul, but you can also do it through your own soul without the touch. Apparently that's going to be taught in the future. There's a position or a place, just like waking someone up, that they wake up in a calm, ready to go attitude, so to speak.
Well, I had a conversation with someone this week, and for some strange reason, they usually just, kind of come, conduct business, and take off. Okay, so, the way we are in Canada, if you can't conduct a transaction in 35 seconds, everybody gets irritated, because everybody's in a hurry. But, he decided to, instead of just saying, well, how are you? He extended that question and he said, is there anything new? And he's never asked that before. And I thought, well, isn't that strange? What prompted him to do that? And I said, well, do you really want to get an answer to that question? And he says, that'd be pretty interesting. So now I was confronted with having to physically explain in a matter of a short period of time what was new. And I succeeded. I succeeded in a way that was gentle, inviting, and comprehensive, so that he actually understood. And the reason I knew that and what I was trying to achieve was to get a confirmation and a conclusion. And the way I could only do that is if he could articulate a conclusion to me. And he did, which was tremendous. So I didn't put those words in his mouth.
Mhm.
I set up an explanation, and he arrived at that conclusion on his own. And it was graceful. And that this was really, really important. So then the question became, are you then going to cling to the donkey hesitancy, or are you going to look forward to the new emergence of the new technology? And he said, well, the answer is pretty obvious. The future is in the future, and the past is in the past. so, so, yeah, he's ready to get on the horse. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that soul was brought there in a way. This is the answer he gave to Azar, that the soul, you were put in that position, but also his soul moved him into that position to be able
Precisely.
to, yeah, this is what will be so beautiful when we see people honestly starting to seek out new knowledge, not to ridicule you, not to make fun of you, but to actually say, I'm really interested in this. Maybe this is a part of these fields that are being spread across the planet, that people will start looking more into themselves, their understanding, and the rest of it as the souls are really organizing it, not so much the physicality end of it, even though we think it's the physicality doing the whole work. So this is beautiful when someone, and don't you feel good about that refreshment too, that you provided that soul?
Well, certainly because he gave me an honest answer. You know, first of all, it was a legitimate question. Okay, you know, so you know, if you go up to someone and you say, "Oh, hi, how are you?" Oh, you know, I have a backache, you know, my knee is killing me, and there's, oh, geez, you know, I'm really sorry I asked that question. I was just, it was just elevator talk, and you know, I don't really need to share in your misery, but you know, he asked the question, and I thought, well, you know, let me give him a positive answer because it was a positive question, and he took it that way, and he arrived at that conclusion on his own. So the thing was that the impetus, the input energy, in other words, was coming from him. So he was asking for a contribution on my side, and it was welcome. It was, you know, graceful. That this was huge. So, and I find this with others, you know, if you go and you know, try it out, just like, you know, trying on a pair of shoes to see if they fit. You know, you just try it out and say, oh, you know, oh, so what are you doing these days? Oh, well, I'm involved with the plasma science. Oh, well, that's nice. Have a nice day, and out the door they go, right? Because they don't want to hear. They just want to hear what they want to hear. They don't want to hear what you have to say. Okay, and that's kind of the difference. So, and this is noticeably changed. I'm having much more success, and I think all of us on this panel have had the same frustration. And the worst part, of course, has been our families. You know, where you know, you end up being the black sheep in the family. You know, and it's you don't end up being the black sheep in the community because you know you can kind of disappear in the community, but in your family, well, you can't disappear because you're part of the family. So, oh, you know, and as one of my friends told me, you know, she can't talk to anyone in her family about what I'm doing, and I talk to her quite a bit, and and you know, they just like
We
say,
know,
oh well, it's, you know,
we
it's
know.
it's this old man that you know, is losing it. So okay, well, that's fine. I'm losing it, but you know, uh, we are in a new outer space age and we know it. And so we're all trying to work out how we can navigate through these dimensions and work with the tools that we have. So, you know,
And maybe
we-
we can unblock them by
well,
giving to them. We think we're giving as you know, if someone comes up and starts this conversation with you, Alex, and you say, well, listen, I can open this person up more to be able to receive by giving to them and taking away what's blocking them, even though you may not realize you're taking away what's blocking them. So this is another thing. I know Jefferson has raised this point a few times. We've all experienced it. They don't have the field strength to receive it at this point in time, but I think we can unblock that in a way.
so I was one of these people, you know, for the first 40 years of my life, I was all in on the conventional science. Okay.
Agree? We didn't know another way, Alex. It's
Well,
hidden from us.
yes, it was hidden from us, but the thing is, it failed us. Our belief in that system failed us, and you know, a lot of us don't get a second chance. So, you know, when I was 35, I was given 6 months to live. Well, that was, hmm, wow, that was more
That
than
was a
35.
bummer.
Well, you know, like I was in the prime of my adulthood, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And you know, I couldn't kick a soccer ball 10 yards. I thought, wait a second, is this what an old man feels like? You know, I don't want to be an old man, but at 35, I wasn't considering myself an old man. But you know, that's what I was told. And you know, I was told by experts. So then when I recovered from that and I was able to kick a ball 60 yards, then I found out that there were other experts. And I wanted to be that other expert. And you say, well, and I wanted to tell my friends that there were other experts. And that's what was so disappointing because, you know, if you're leading by example and they say, oh, well, you know, you were sick and now you're healthy, that's a good example. You know, okay, can you, you know, tell me, you know, what is the secret to your success? Nobody asked that question. Nobody. I couldn't believe it.
Nobody
But
said, how did you do it, Alex? How?
nobody.
Wow.
That was the worst part. And I thought, well, with friends like that, who needs enemies? I had to totally, wholesale change my friends.
And your doctors. Or did they observe you as well and not ask how were you able
Well,
to achieve this? Or did they say it was another miracle? We don't understand it, but
I
yeah,
never gave them that opportunity, you know, because what they always say is, you know, well, you want to come in for a checkup? No, no, I don't. Thanks, you know, thanks for the memories.
But I can imagine once Mr. Kesh has this handful of students in a way learning the transmutation and it starts to be confirmed by governments in a way that this is going to be a huge tipping point for people to start taking up an interest. What is this all about? It can't be possible someone can move from New York to Brussels in 5 minutes on a ship or do it instantaneously through their soul. These are things that people are going to dream about doing and want to achieve. So this is probably when this gets revealed, it'll be, I'm sure it'll try to be hidden initially, but maybe not. As the
Oh,
Americans
no,
and
no, they're
Chinese,
definitely trying now.
yeah, But I'm saying we bring the Americans on board along with the Chinese. Who's going to question this when both governments are confirming we're using this technology? This is our new way. Now, maybe they'll continue on for a while till it becomes acceptable in a way, or that it's not deniable anymore. We've brought artifacts back from the moon. We've done some other things. We've explored certain areas that we couldn't see with the telescope, and they're talking about it as if they've been there. This is an impossibility, or if it's not, we want to find out more. So this is one of these pieces of technology will be a part of the tipping point, and it may be the transmutation, since we're all already doing it in a way, just not aware of it.
Well, hopefully with these sessions, the knowledge seekers, we're looking at the strong approach. The Kesh Foundation is on the air 7 days a week now. We're not the only performers, and it's no longer just on Rick's shoulders. So many have picked up the ball, and all we have to do is look at the progress with the Iranian community, the hundreds of thousands of people there, and the tens of thousands in the Brazilian community. Well, actually, it's hundreds of thousands. I think the broadcast range is over 300,000 in the Brazilian community. But nevertheless, it's growing. It's not receding. So volume is not the only thing that we're after. Quality is also important. And that's one of the reasons, the panelists keep attending these meetings, because their quality is what they want to enhance, because our responsibility is growing daily, because we're part of the community. And if a member is sick in your community, then that affects you. It's part of your community. So it becomes our duty to help. But, we have to help in a graceful way. It has to be done in a willing way. So we can't do it in a physical way and just say, here, let me grab your arm and lead you. The first reaction would be to move to pull the arm back, wouldn't it? Because that's the same reflex you get if a policeman comes and throws handcuffs on you. You want to withdraw your hand so you don't get bound. So that's a failure in methodology. So we now have a new methodology, and it will be successful, because that's the methodology that we have actually used. So now that we understand that methodology exists, and if we understand that that's what we use, then that is the success methodology. So that's what we need to do. And they keep talking about the fourth revolution, but they have to fourth technical revolution, but you have to understand 3 strikes and you're out. So we're leading the new revolution, new technological revolution.
For sure.
Our
Anyone
focus,
else?
our focus is on the
Alex,
future.
go ahead.
Our focus is on the future and what we can do and bring to that future to enhance the prospects on this planet. And we're really not interested in commentary as such, and entertainment. This is not a fun show. This is a matter of life and death, and it extends to the entire planet. And as you say, beyond. Thanks very much, everybody, for allowing me to present. This is really an exciting journey, and I hope you're all enjoying these sessions. And thanks to you, Mark. Please continue.
Okay, anyone else want to make a comment? Ask a question? Feel free. I know a lot of times we think, is this really me or is this Memorex? Am I really opening up to a whole new enlightenment about my creation? I thought it was all explained to me that, if I didn't do certain things, I'd end up in certain places, meaning heaven or hell and the rest of it. But now we're understanding much, much more. So I think we're becoming slightly seasoned and that process continues. And especially if you get the transmutation under your belt and you're able to use it, again, not all the time, but just this knowledge going out into the environment where people hear there's another way to travel besides the rocket and the jumbo jet and the donkey and the rest of it. They're going to become interested. And hopefully it's not going to take them as long as it's taken us to get to this position. But we are blessed to be here. We're privileged to be here. And again, we're just the forerunners, the light bearers in a way, or carrying the torch, kind of like cheerleaders. But once the systems come into place in the marketplace, I think, and maybe that's what the governments are gearing up for. They know there'll be such a stampede into this technology. Not everyone, of course, at first, but as they see the others doing it, there's going to be no denying that this is real and you have the capabilities to move as the creator moves, to think as the creator moves, speak as the creator speaks. And then we take it out into the universe in interactions with the universal community. We'll see how it shakes out, but it does look like, especially when I heard him say we're bringing in the Americans, that they don't lose face. So there's something going on in the background that probably we haven't heard the last of it, let's say. Just the beginning of it. And that we move into this direction, away from killing and warring.
I think all of us have also, Mark, if I may interject, have noticed certain strange occurrences. And
You mean coincidences?
Yeah, coincidences, that type of thing. And we would slough that off as, so well, that's just a coincidence. But I've been more mindful of these things, and it's extremely interesting how they've been coming together. And because I've been mindful of them, when they happen, not only do I note that they happen, but I'm prepared, which is really, really cool. But one of the incidents that happened to me, and then you just brought up my memory here, and it had to do with a cheerleader. And there was a very popular girl in our school, and she was a cheerleader. And I've lost contact with a lot of the people that I've known from my school days. And I thought, well, gee, why am I thinking about her? And so I thought I'd look her up. And I found out that she's passed away 8 years ago, which I think very strange, because I mean, for me, it seems like she died prematurely. But anyway, she died from cancer. So that this was prior to the pandemic. But what was a coincidence was that the day that she died was the same date that I was looking at her obituary 8 years later. And that happened last week.
No coincidence. Hopefully you sent her elevation for her soul.
Yeah, I did. But it was a sad day for me, because I remember her as being like an extremely happy person. And I know that, well, I don't know. She appeared to have a affluent life. So, she didn't seem to have the pressure that, someone in poverty would have, or, someone struggling in a middle class, if you will, having to pay for the expensive car and having the, lucrative job to pay for that expensive car so that they can drive to their expensive mortgage. She seemed to be well off financially. So, it's sad to see that someone who, in my mind, was very happy,
Full of life.
full of life, and I mean, when you talk about someone who walks into the room and how they light up the room, that was her. And the thing is, she's having a comfortable life. So, to actually suffer from the cancer, which we now know is a psychosomatic condition, it it shows that there are other things that we have to take into account.
Yes,
But
of
anyway,
course, these technologies are going to make living much easier, where you don't have to worry about the feeding. You don't have to worry about the heating, the transportation, the jobs, and different things. People will probably live longer because they're happier, because so many of these things are going to be met in so many ways. It's not going to be such a struggle on this planet, and we don't even know the half of it, probably, living in North America or Canada, the rest of it. We don't even know what struggling really is, but people will. So when you're not happy, or whatever happens emotionally to you, you create these conditions and you check out. But if we can reverse that, where most of your needs are being met, or all of them are being met, people will probably just naturally live longer without even any life extension technologies that we will employ, I'm sure.
Well, the problem, of course, in North America is we have the financial burden of our infrastructure. So if we're looking at a third world country and they're looking at the possibility of incorporating new technologies into their life, that is going to be a very, very positive enhancement. So I think that's going to be very difficult for us here in North America. If we look at in Germany, for instance, right now, what's going on with the deindustrialization, the number of large companies and then companies who are over 100 years old abandoning the country, those jobs are not being replaced. So
Right, but did you hear me when I read the future shared interest? How many jobs were created? How much was added? This growing the fungi and things that people can increase they're going to want to live in a way longer, because education is happening, schools are being built, roads, dams, bridges, trains, the rest of it. I mean, if I was living in squalor, and I don't think I'd want to stay long, even though we all have the desire to live in a way. What's the use when every day it's a struggle to get a little bit of energy, to make a little bit of money, to see your children not doing better, and the rest of it? No healthcare facilities to accommodate. I think as these changes come in and the technology is spread across the planet, people will just naturally, because they're happier, they'll live longer. I mean, you're still going to have to deal with all the shortcomings in the physicality, but maybe we'll make them a little shorter shortcomings as we continue to develop and improve.
yes, I totally agree with you, Mark.
Yep. Yep. And then how about going into space and interacting with other souls, as Tesla did? I think Da Vinci also added that. Remember, he said he's making little Da Vincis out of us in a way. But Da Vinci also talked about going into a different dimension and getting some of the answers to some of the questions. And of course, a lot of this has been hidden, not so much with Tesla, We've heard those stories before, but we'll find a lot of answers, I think, and they're going to be comforting for us, which is again happiness, and that'll bring you a longer dimension of existence wherever you want to be.
So do you believe at this point in time that these answers will come in your dreams?
Oh, for sure. Depends what I'm seeking, I'm sure.
I agree.
I think it's probably already happened, Alex. We just weren't aware of it.
I agree.
Yep. I think we've been interacting with souls. Obviously, the soul has a direct line of communication, its own, I know it has its own secret life and its own line of communication with the universal community. So this has already been happening. It's just the physicality in a way that's been left out of the loop so far, but now we're bringing that in as well. So again, mystery of the ages are being unraveled by this universal teacher known as Mr. Kesh. And we're very fortunate to be here and to take part of it and help to bring the change. We're all carrying a little bit of this very large carpet, a little corner of it. And together it's going to happen along with the systems. I mean, we're talking about satellites, UBISOs, communication bundles, and the rest, and it's only in its infancy. And then, of course, the non-dimensional plasma that's being introduced, or these creator rays, cosmic rays. So we're just in the infancy, but we're privileged to be able to start.
Wait a second.
Hello?
Hello. Non-dimensional?
He's calling it a non-dimensional plasma system that they'll be introducing. That's probably going to get, he said the UBISOs would be hooked up to this as well as the communication bundles and the sessions that we're inviting people to take part in. So this is going to be a step up, as I see it, and make it easier to do things we're trying to do. So we're being gifted this as well. It's for all of us. Anyone else have a thought, a comment, a disagreement? Or anyone want to share anything about their experience? Why don't we just open that up for another minute or two, just to allow people to bring any sort of experience they had in the systems. I know Steph, sorry, she said she fell asleep, and we'll go on. So she was going to share something. She said she had something, but I don't see her here now. She may have had to leave. So there's a lot of new ways that knowledges are going to be introduced. It seems like it's not coming from Earth anymore. It's going to be shared by the universal community. And as he said, we couldn't hold a door in regard to knowledge with the universal community. So perhaps interacting on the soul level and bringing some of that back is the way it'll be transferred. And in addition to them, again, will they physically be here to show us how to build the craft, or will people learn through interaction of the soul the next step to take in developing a shielding system or other systems? These ideas will come to them because they wanted to solve a problem or build the craft. So I think this is the way it's going to move. He said the knowledge won't come from this planet, it'll come from the universal community. And they are way ahead of us in that dimension, but we're both in the same position as far as the soul level, that we haven't gotten there yet. We're getting there here, and but we haven't fully gotten there yet. So this is a process, and I'm sure they're looking into this quite carefully. So we may share with them on the soul level, and they may share with us on the soul level, instead of an actual physical interaction, but we don't know exactly. But he seems to be stressing the interaction on the soul level to find knowledge in the universe, with Tesla, with Da Vinci, with other people we've come to know, perhaps. So it's an amazing way. You know, most people all know you have to go to college and learn from a professor or go to the university and the rest of it. That's the way you learn. You can't possibly pick up knowledge somewhere out there in the universe. It's empty. Can't you see it? There's
Well, you
nothing
have to look
there.
towards the horizon to see the technology there that's looming.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else want to come in? I'm going to play the volunteers video again, encouraging everyone to, if you can't join this month's session, perhaps the next month or the month after that. And then you'll find out that it's quite a unique experience for you, and finding more out about yourself, your interactions, your emotions, and how to go to the next step.
You're going to take the screen?
Okay, yeah, I was just waiting to see if anyone wanted to make a comment. If not, we will take the screen and then play the volunteer video. And this is how the system, obviously, if Mr. Kesh went to the corporate world, I think it would all get tied up, and then it would have to be researched again, and then they'd come out with different findings. And this professor, as we saw in China, where they want to stick with the old knowledge and not bring in the new knowledge. And many professors are probably, in a way, they've written books, they've given speeches, they've put out their position papers, and then to come to find out that they were not as correct as they thought there would be is a big humbling event. And a lot of people don't want to go through that. And so they block it. But I think the Chinese realize this, and they unblocked certain things or certain important individuals or high-level people who didn't want to see this come into play. They've been, in a way, pushed off to the side, even though they'll be still part of it, I think, and they'll probably really look forward to it once they start to understand it and see it. They'll join in as well. As he said, with the world leaders, even though they have to do things to confirm their existence, once they have a turnaround, they will be some of the best advocates for the Kesh Foundation in the coming time. Not all of them, because a lot of them are going to run away from these systems. Their soul won't allow them to go in. But for the ones that can and do and get processed, they will become quite an asset to the distribution of this knowledge across this planet and perhaps the universe. Okay, so I'm going to play the volunteer video, then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will end. Anyone else want to bring something at this point that they've been sort of holding back? If not, then we'll carry on, and we invite you again to take part in the pre-transmutation sessions. It's for yourself, yes, but it's not so much for yourself. It's more to bring the others up. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay. If not, then let's continue with this. Yes, I thought I heard a mic open.
I would just say thank you very much, Mark and Alex and everybody on this call for relentlessly and always being here every week. I'm really grateful, and thank you so much.
And thank you. You're part of it too. Whatever position.
Absolutely.
You're
Infinite
in.
gratitude.
We're all gonna step up to a bigger role in this release of the technology. But we need to be trained, and there's a lot of things we still need to learn. And of course, if we flub it up, if we kind of make assumptions when we're teaching this or something else, people will lose sort of faith in this. So if we become quite knowledgeable and are able to do it, as Mr. Kesh said, I don't teach anything I haven't done. So hopefully we can take up that same sort of thing. And if we don't know how to do it, we can find the answers within the souls that are on this planet and in the universe, which is, again, another profound statement. Just thinking that you could access knowledge from above, let's say, or maybe they're just next to you, but in a different dimension of energy. But they're waiting to share. And souls do love to give. So I don't think this is far reach to say we can get answers, as Tesla explained, and I think Da Vinci as well. This is where they got some of their understandings. Thank you all again for joining us. And we wish you health, we wish you peace, happiness, and the rest of it as you continue on this journey and bringing all of these beautiful emotions to the others. And you'll start to see, I think there will come a time we're going to see so many smiling faces on this planet that we've never seen before. So many times you go into the market, you go into the store, so many people are, you can see they're not having a great day. They're struggling with this, they're struggling with that. You can just, in a way, sense it. And of course, we elevate them, but this is all going to change, and the frowns are going to be turned into smiles, especially in the war-torn sections of this planet. And as Mr. Kesh said, it's already in progress. It's happening as we're speaking now, even though we're still seeing images and destruction and the rest of it. It's all coming into play, and we're all part of it. So thank you all, and continue researching, discovering, interacting with other souls. This is one of the keys we're learning right now. Thanks, everyone. Again, anyone else want to mention anything before we close? Okay. Yeah, I was thinking of Jefferson, how he asked Mr. Kesh, when are we going to see it on CNN? My family doesn't accept it, and that's what he said. He said, when they show it on TV, then the family will accept it. But maybe they're going to go a different way, as a lot of these news networks and other things don't have much of a viewership anymore. I think they're only in the tens of thousands, where many of these platforms these days and podcasts are getting millions of views. Not ours per se yet, but that's all coming into place as well. So it's quite a beautiful work that we're seeing done. And as I said, we're all part of it. And so be proud that you've been touched by this knowledge. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Alex, for, again, continuing to support us and bringing us new understandings of this immense knowledge, this endless knowledge that we're receiving and sharing. Okay, as I said, I'm going to play the volunteer video and then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Thank you all. I see Lisbeth has just joined us. Thank you, Lisbeth. We're just about winding up today's session. Thank you for all your hard work in the background and preparing the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for World Peace, the transcripts, and all the rest of the work you do that none of us really see, but we're the beneficiaries of it. Thank you, Lisbeth.